Arching during bench press, a project by Daniel Chen, Derek Ng, Dylan Fabiani, and Nickolas Lukashin. Arching is a technique used during bench press that involves extending the spine, retracting the shoulder blades, and pushing your sternum up. This will decrease your range of motion of the bench press. So here's each of our initial thoughts about arching. So me as a powerlifter, I started arching early on. My coach taught me from a young age how to retract my shoulder blades, squeeze my lats, and extend my upper back as much as I can. For me, I naturally have a big arch due to my spinal mobility, but I use arching more as a means of achieving tightness through the lift than reducing my range of motion.
Initial thoughts on the bench press arch. I think having a natural arch during your bench press is very beneficial because that would be the best way to lift weight while reducing the risk of injury. I believe that having excessive arch in the back while bench pressing is actually non-beneficial to building muscle hypertrophy because you're ruining the range of motion and not recruiting the same amount of muscle fibers as you would with a more natural arch.
I can remember, I've always arched my back and retracted my scapula during the bench press based on the way that I saw older, more experienced lifters perform the bench press. I was still a beginner at the time and didn't really understand the purpose behind it, but as my training age matured, I did more research on my own and discovered that it was a way to better position one's shoulders and to further stabilize themselves on the bench. And although I do train powerlifting style, I do not arch my back for all the same reasons that a powerlifter may arch for, specifically decreasing the range of motion. I do it mainly for injury prevention and better positioning for my shoulders, my scapula, and improved stabilization on the bench.
So all of us group members can agree that arching is beneficial overall and won't detract from the lift if done appropriately. So now let's see what our interviewees have to say about arching.
All right, we're here with Colm. He's going to give us his opinion. So Colm, what have you heard or learned about benching with an arch?
I know powerlifters do it, and I know there's no benching in strongman. I don't know. It decreases your range of motion, so it's technically cheating, I think. And I don't personally really do it, although maybe I should because I see legitimate people doing it. Thoughts on arching your back and bench press? I do wonder how safe it is longevity, although you're not really loading your spine, so I don't know if that really comes into play.
All right, Bryson, what have you heard or learned before about arching?
I remember when we first started going to the gym together, when I first did bench press, I didn't have any kind of back arch because I was totally new to everything. And it was easily my worst lift, and I thought it was extremely difficult. And then you kind of introduced me to back arching and like the importance of it. What I thought was most helpful was the fact that it really gives you a lot more, I guess, stability with it. I just felt like my bench in general improved a lot doing it. I know it kind of decreases your range of motion too. I wouldn't necessarily consider it to be cheating or anything. I especially think that it's a really difficult thing to really pull off to perfection. So I think you definitely get rewarded if you are able to arch your back like the best that it could be. So those are my thoughts on it.
With no arch, the bar is a great distance away from the contact point, which is between the bottom of your rib cage and lower pec muscles, both vertically and horizontally. And there's a high risk of shoulder impingement associated with this type of benching. And by arching, it brings the contact point closer to your shoulders, more parallel. This reduces the distance the bar has traveled both vertically as well as horizontally. So here's a before and after shot. And so with a flat back, it essentially increases the moment arm of the barbell. So moment arm is quantified by the perpendicular distance from an axis, your axis being your shoulder joint, to the line of action of a force, the barbell. And so the greater the moment arm of an object, the more it wants to cause a rotational force, and the more muscle force you had to produce in order to counteract the moment arm. So by increasing this horizontal distance here, this increases the moment arm of the barbell. So the structures that get overstressed with this shoulder extension moment arm this barbell is creating, your anterior deltoids are involved, as well as your upper clavicular pec fibers. But structures that can be stressed are the bicep tendon and your pec tendon. So the solution to reduce that strain is to arch and decrease that horizontal distance and decrease that moment arm. And some additional notes on arching is retracting your shoulder blades. This pulls your chest up, shortens your range of motion, and puts your shoulders in a safer position to reduce your risk of rotator cuff injuries. So now we're going to talk about some studies that had some interesting findings that relate to arching during the bench press. So this study took a group of competitive powerlifters and had half of them bench with an arch and the other half bench with a flat back. And the results were that 1 rep max with bench press did not significantly differ between the two groups. And arching does not seem to significantly increase bench press performance compared to a standard bench. And the two groups were evenly split between lifters among different weight classes, age, sex, etc. So the data was as reliable as it could have been. So if it doesn't increase bench press performance in terms of weight lifted, what does arching accomplish? So your pec major has different portions. The upper portion towards the collarbone is called the clavicular head. The lower part is the sternocostal head, and some texts would say there's an abdominal head as well down here. So this study measured EMG activity across the different portions in a decline bench as well as in incline bench. And the results were that for both concentric and eccentric activity, the lower sternal portions had greater activation in the decline bench. And in addition, the upper clavicular portions had no change between the two variations. Now, this study also looked at EMG activity across different parts of the pectoral muscle and how it's affected by joint angle and how much you tuck your elbows. So it compared 50, 70, and 90-degree glenohumeral joint angles. This red bar represents 50, this green bar represents 70, and this yellow bar represents 90. So 90 degrees is essentially fully flaring your elbows out, and 50 degrees would look something like that. And what this study found was that your upper clavicular pec fibers had more activation with 50 and 70 degrees. So tucking your elbows in more could lead to greater activation of the upper pec fibers and no effect on lower pec fibers. So tucking your elbows in will naturally cause you to touch the bar lower on your chest, which does increase the moment arm and place additional strain on your anterior deltoids. As you can see, the activation for your anterior delts is much higher for 50 degrees where you're tucking your elbows in. But as you recall, you can mitigate that and reduce that moment arm by arching. Furthermore, the risk of both acute and chronic shoulder injury may be increased by repetitive movements performed with the shoulder close to 90 degrees of abduction, as seen during the bench press when performed with a grip width of greater than 1.5 times biacromial width. So benching with your elbows flared and a wide grip is likely to cause injuries and does not have any tangible benefits. A popular adage in the fitness community is benching with a flat back and touching the bar higher on your sternum will better target your upper pecs and is more conducive to hypertrophy, but this typically causes shoulder impingement as it narrows the space in the AC joint, leading your rotator cuff tendon to impinge. So the more you tuck your elbows, the more shoulder flexion is emphasized, which is your upper clavicular fibers. And conversely, the more you flare out your elbows, the more horizontal adduction is emphasized, which that would be your lower sternal pec fibers. Where you touch the bar on your chest doesn't determine whether the upper clavicular or lower sternal fibers gets targeted. The type of movement demand that you place on your shoulder does. So just to recap what we've covered so far, arching will maximize muscle fiber recruitment of the pectoralis major and other synergistic muscles like the triceps while being safer for the shoulder joint by simultaneously decreasing shoulder flexion demands and allowing more elbow tuck. Elevating the sternum in relation to the shoulder joint to mimic a decline bench will maximize lower sternal pectoral activation, while tucking your elbows maximizes upper clavicular activation as well as triceps brachii activation. So arching allows for the former to occur, which is turning it into a decline press, and the latter to be safely done with less shoulder flexion stress. Now, this study revealed that the arch technique increased latissimus dorsi mean and peak activation, generating activation of approximately 13% maximal voluntary contraction, regardless of percentage of the 1 rep max lifted. So arching does seem to increase your lat activation. So the lats are the antagonist during the bench press movement, while the pec major is the agonist. So the lats don't contribute in any way to pressing the weight up. So what is the significance of this increased lat activation? Well, co-activation and joint stiffness is a concept in biomechanics. Agonist and antagonist muscles can co-contract about a joint to improve joint stability. So increased lat activation causes a concurrent increase in agonist activity, the pecs, to offset the antagonist activity. So this recruits more muscle fibers in parallel in total of the pectoralis major enhancing force production, muscle stiffness, and movement stability. So this is the infographic that we created that we showed to the people we interviewed. So arching during bench, is it cheating or necessary? Arching involves extending your spine, retracting your scapula, and elevating your sternum. It's a technique that can reduce range of motion and increase stability during bench. One study showed arching increases lat activation and reduces shoulder strain. Agonist co-contraction can enhance muscle activation and joint stability. Arching mimics a decline bench press, which activates a larger number of lower pec fibers. Shortening range of motion is not correlated with heavier lifts. Most top powerlifters have a moderate arch and fair range of motion. No evidence showing arching increases 1 rep max bench press. And the increased muscle fiber recruitment, joint stability, and reduced shoulder impingement from properly arching are what can potentially lead to more gains and less shoulder issues, not a 1-inch range of motion and an exorcist arch.
All right, calm. So after going over what we discussed, do you have any changes in mind of your opinion?
Yeah. So the most interesting thing that you brought up was that the decreased range of motion isn't really actually cheating. I like how you pointed out that like the top power lifters don't have a crazy arch, and yet they still have the max benches around. So that's really interesting. I'll probably incorporate arching into my benching if I ever go back to benching. I like how you talked about like the co-contraction of the antagonist muscles increasing the stability of your joints. So that makes sense in terms of safety and probably.
All right. So after the discussion, have your thoughts or opinions changed about arching?
Yeah, I thought it was really interesting because it confirmed a lot of my initial thoughts about like stability and everything like that, but specifically I learned more about like the specific muscles that are involved and the benefits of arching. I thought it was really, really interesting, and it kind of confirmed that like I don't think it's cheating at all. I think it's definitely necessary. I think you get a lot of benefits from arching your back compared to not arching, and I think it's definitely one that I'll be going with moving forward is improving my arch and kind of getting the benefits off of doing the arch.